They dressed Ember Ashwood in white like a bride, but she was walking to her funeral. The morning sun cut through the pines surrounding Pinewood territory, throwing long shadows across the central square, where 300 wolves stood in human form. Their silence was the kind that came before executions, the kind that meant someone had already been judged, sentenced, and condemned. Ember stood at the center of it all, barefoot on packed earth, still cold from last night's frost. 23 years old, chestnut hair braided tight against her skull, hazel eyes that had learned early not to expect mercy. The white dress they'd given her was simple undyed wool that hung loose on her thin frame. It had belonged to her mother once. Sarah Ashwood had worn it to her own mating ceremony before Ember was born, before sickness took her 5 years ago, leaving Ember alone with a father too weak to protect her and a stepmother who wore cruelty like perfume. The dress was the only thing of her mother's that Vivian hadn't burned or sold. Around Ember's wrists, ceremonial rope bit into skin, red silk twisted with silver thread, pretty bindings for an ugly purpose. Her hands were bound in front of her, close enough that she could see the purple bruises already forming. Behind her, the pack pressed close. She could smell their fear mixed with relief. Relief that the cursed wolf had not chosen them. Relief that the Omega girl with no value and less future would die so they could sleep safely in their beds. At the front of the crowd stood Alpha Rowan Blackthorn. 47 winters had salted his dark hair with gray, but his body remained powerful. Broad shoulders, thick arms, the kind of physical presence that made weaker wolves drop their eyes without thinking. He wore authority like armor, and the pack loved him for it. He'd ruled Pinewood territory for 20 years. 20 years of prosperity, they said. 20 years of peace. 20 years of lies if the old stories held any truth. But Ember had learned not to speak of old stories. Omegas who asked too many questions disappeared. Omegas who challenged the natural order found themselves assigned to the most dangerous tasks. Omegas who forgot their place woke up with broken bones and no memory of how they'd gotten them. So Ember had stayed quiet. Tended her grandmother's herb garden behind the cottage she shared with her father and his new family. Learned the healing plants by touch and taste and smell. Kept her head down and her mouth shut and hoped that being invisible would be enough to survive. It hadn't been enough. Rowan stepped forward, his voice carried across the square, without effort pitched for the crowd to hear every syllable. 3 warriors dead in the last moon cycle. Tomas, Henrik, young Callum barely 18 summers. He paused, letting the names settle heavy on the morning air. Their bodies found at the edge of Blackstone Forest, torn apart, barely recognizable as human when we brought them home. A murmur rippled through the assembled wolves, fear and anger mixed together. The cursed wolf grows bolder, Rowan continued. 20 years it's haunted those ruins. 20 years we've forbidden anyone from entering that cursed place. But the beast no longer stays in the shadows. It hunts our borders now. It kills our people. He turned to look at Ember. His gray eyes were cold as river stones. The elders have consulted the old ways, the ancient laws written before any of us drew breath. They tell us that when a beast cannot be killed by strength of arms, it must be appeased by sacrifice. Blood for blood. Life for life. More murmurs. Ember's stomach twisted. She'd known this was coming since her father had appeared in her doorway at dawn with shame written across his face. Known it when Vivian smiled that satisfied smile. Known it when the warriors came to bind her wrists and dress her in white. But knowing didn't make it easier to hear. Ember Ashwood, Rowan said, and his voice held no warmth. No regret, just cold practicality. You have been chosen to serve your pack in this its hour of need. You will walk into Blackstone Forest. You will offer yourself to the cursed wolf. Your sacrifice may purchase safety for those who remain. Your death may grant us peace. Your death may grant us peace. Not will. May. They didn't even have the courtesy to pretend her life would definitely save theirs. She was a gamble, a throw of the dice, an Omega whose existence mattered so little that risking her on the slim chance it might help was considered wise leadership. Ember looked out at the crowd, searched the faces she'd known her entire life for any sign of protest, any indication that anyone thought this was wrong. Her father Owen stood near the back, 48 years old and already stooped like a man of 70. He stared at the ground, couldn't meet her eyes, wouldn't speak in her defense. He'd made his choice the day he married Vivian. Made it again every time he stayed silent while his second wife's cruelty carved pieces from his daughter's soul. Beside him, Vivian watched with barely concealed satisfaction. Dark hair pulled back severe from a face that might have been beautiful, if not for the meanness that lived behind her eyes. She'd hated Ember from the moment Owen brought her into their home. Hated her for being Sarah's daughter. Hated her for being a reminder of the first wife, the better wife, the one Owen had actually loved. And next to Vivian, 16-year-old Wren, Ember's half-sister. The girl had their father's weak jaw and their stepmother's dark coloring. Tears streamed down her face. Her mouth moved in what might have been an apology or a prayer. But Vivian had his hand clamped tight on her arm, keeping her still, keeping her silent. Wren had shown Ember kindness in small ways when Vivian wasn't watching. An extra blanket in winter, a portion of her own dinner slipped under Ember's adore. Whispered warnings when Vivian was in a particularly vicious mood. But kindness without courage was just another form of cowardice. No one spoke. No one stepped forward. 300 wolves stood witness, and not one of them said this was wrong. that offering an innocent to a monster made them no better than the beast they feared. "Do you understand?" Rowan asked, and it wasn't really a question. Ember's throat was dry, but she forced words out anyway. "Yes, Alpha." What else could she say? That she didn't want to die. That terror clawed at her chest until breathing took conscious effort. That she'd spent the last hour since learning her fate thinking of all the things she'd never get to do. Such truths were irrelevant. Omega feelings didn't matter to anyone but the Omega feeling them. "Then it is time." Beta Silas Gray stepped forward from where he'd been standing beside Rowan. Early 50s with iron gray hair and a face carved from granite. Loyal to Rowan beyond question or reason. In his hands, he carried more ceremonial rope. He knelt before Ember with the mechanical efficiency of someone performing a distasteful but necessary task. Wrapped the rope around her ankles. Not tight enough to cut off circulation, but secure enough that she could walk but not run. The symbolism was clear. She would enter the forest of her own volition, would walk to her death with something that looked like dignity from a distance. When he finished, Silas stood and gestured toward the tree line visible beyond the square's edge. "The Alpha commands it. The Pack requires it. May your sacrifice bring us peace, Ember Ashwood." The procession began. Rowan led, then Silas and two other warriors flanking Ember. Behind them, the entire pack followed at a respectful distance. A funeral march for someone not yet dead. The sun climbed higher as they walked, but it brought no warmth. The morning stayed cold, the sky stayed gray. They passed through Pinewood territory proper. Cottages and cabins arranged in loose clusters. The blacksmith's forge cold and dark this early. The communal hall where pack meetings were held. The healer's house where old Margot tended the sick and injured with her carefully hoarded knowledge. Ember had wanted to apprentice with Margot once. Had asked when she was 14, flush with her grandmother's teachings and desperate to be useful, to have value beyond simply existing. Margot had looked at her with something like pity and explained that Omegas weren't allowed formal apprenticeships, that teaching healing to someone of such low rank would upset the natural order, that Ember should be content with her station and not reach for things meant for her betters. So Ember had learned on her own, in secret, from her grandmother Eleanor's carefully preserved journals and the herb garden behind the cottage. Had taught herself which plants stopped bleeding and which eased pain, which could draw infection from a wound and which could kill if the dose was wrong. Knowledge her pack would never value. Skills they'd dismiss as Omega meddling in things beyond her understanding. The forest loomed ahead. Blackstone Forest had been forbidden for as long as Ember could remember. Longer. The elders spoke of it in hushed tones, warning children away from its shadow depths. Local legend claimed the woods were cursed, that those who entered too deeply never returned, their souls trapped forever wandering beneath the canopy, calling out for rescue that would never come. Whether the stories held truth or were just superstition designed to keep the curious away, Ember didn't know. But she knew the forest had been forbidden for at least 20 years. Ever since the day Alpha King Theron Nightfang supposedly went mad and abandoned his throne. Except some of the oldest wolves, the ones who remembered, whispered different stories late at night when they thought no one was listening. They said Theron hadn't gone mad, said he'd been betrayed, that his own beta had poisoned him and stolen the crown while Theron was too weak to fight back. But those were just stories. Omega fantasies about powerful alphas brought low. The official history was clear. Theron Nightfang had been a tyrant, had oppressed his people, had deserved what happened to him when they finally rose up and drove him out. The official history was written by Rowan Blackthorn, who'd been Theron's beta 20 years ago, who'd become Alpha when the king fell. Convenient Ember thought how history always favored those who survived to tell it. They reached the forest's edge. Ancient cedars and Douglas firs created a wall of shadow even in daylight. The temperature dropped immediately. The air felt different here, heavier, laden with something Ember couldn't name but could feel pressing against her skin like invisible hands. Rowan raised one arm and the procession halted. "Beyond this point, you walk alone, Ember Ashwood." His voice held the weight of ritual, of ancient law being followed regardless of personal feeling. "May your sacrifice grant us peace. May the beast be satisfied and retreat to the depths from which it came." Two warriors bent to untie the rope around her ankles. The silk slid away, leaving red marks on her skin. Her wrists remained bound, helpless against whatever waited in those shadows. Unable to defend herself, unable to do anything but die with whatever dignity she could scrape together. Ember looked back one final time at the pack, at the people she'd known since birth who now watched her with varying degrees of pity and relief. Her father still wouldn't meet her eyes. Vivienne's satisfaction had evolved into something approaching triumph. Ren sobbed openly now, but Vivienne's grip kept her frozen in place. None of them would speak. None of them would say this was wrong. They would return to their homes and their ordinary lives and forget the Omega who'd purchased their security with her blood. Ember turned away from them, turned toward the forest that would be her grave. She walked because standing still felt like hastening the inevitable. Her bound hands made balance precarious on the uneven ground. Roots snaked across the forest floor, decades of decay, creating a soft carpet that absorbed sound. Behind her, she heard the pack beginning to retreat, already leaving, already forgetting. The forest swallowed her. Sunlight disappeared beneath the canopy. The trees here were massive, their trunks wider than three men standing shoulder to shoulder. Moss covered everything, transforming fallen logs into mounds of green velvet. Ferns grew waist-high in places, their fronds brushing against Ember's dress as she passed. It should have been beautiful. In other circumstances, it might have been, but the silence was wrong. No birds sang, no small animals rustled in the undergrowth, just embers breathing too loud and too fast in the whisper of wind through branches high above. How far should she go? The question circled through her thoughts, finding no purchase. How deep into this cursed place before the wolf found her? Should she call out, announce herself, or would that just hasten her death? Her mind clung to the absurd questions. Better than thinking about teeth closing around her throat. Better than imagining claws tearing through flesh. Better than acknowledging the terror that threatened to buckle her knees with every step. Time lost meaning beneath the canopy. Minutes could have been hours. The forest remained unchanging. Just trees and moss and silence and shadow. Then she smelled it, musk and pine, wild and potent, the scent of something that had never known walls or domestication, the scent of pure predator. Every instinct inherited from her wolf bloodline screamed danger. Her human form couldn't respond with the speed that might save her, couldn't shift into something faster, stronger, better equipped to flee or fight. She was just flesh, just bone. Just a girl in a white dress with bound hands and no weapons and nowhere to run. Ember froze. Her heart hammered so violently she thought it might tear free from her ribs. The undergrowth to her left rustled. Something massive moved through the shadows, circling her with deliberate patience. A hunter assessing prey. She caught glimpses of it between the trees. Silver-black fur, a body far too large to be any natural wolf. Easily twice the size of the largest shifter she'd ever seen in wolf form. The stories hadn't exaggerated. It emerged from the trees directly in front of her, and Ember's breath stopped. The wolf was beautiful and terrible in equal measure. Its coat was the color of storm clouds just before lightning struck, silver gray that darkened to near black along the spine and down the legs. It moved with fluid grace despite its size, each step placed with perfect precision. But it was the eyes that held her frozen. Golden, burning with intelligence far beyond any animal, fixed on her with an intensity that stripped away every defense, every pretense, every carefully constructed wall she'd built to survive life as an Omega. This was no mindless beast. Whatever this creature was or had been, awareness lived behind that predatory gaze. Understanding. Something almost human trapped in a monster's body. Scars crossed its flanks and shoulders. Old wounds healed into white lines through the dense fur. These weren't random injuries from hunting or fighting with other animals. These were methodical. The kind of scars left by weapons wielded with intent to kill. Evidence of battles fought and survived against enemies who knew exactly what they were doing. Around its throat, the fur grew in an unusual pattern, as if something had once rested there. Some collar or binding that had left its mark even after removal. Ember closed her eyes. She couldn't watch her own death approach. Couldn't bear to see those golden eyes go empty when the beast finished what it had come to do. She heard it move closer, felt a displacement of air as the massive head lowered toward her. Hot breath ghosted across her face and throat, scenting her as she had scented it. Learning her, tasting her fear on the air. Any moment now, any heartbeat, teeth would close around her neck. It would be quick, she told herself. It had to be quick. Predators killed fast, made the death clean when they could. The wolf sniffed along her jaw, down to where her pulse beat frantically at the base of her throat, the most vulnerable place, the killing spot. She waited for the bite. It didn't come. Instead, a low rumble emanated from the creature's chest. Not quite a growl, something deeper, more complex. The sound vibrated through Ember's body, raising goosebumps along her arms despite the lack of any true cold. Then impossibly, the wolf stepped back. Ember's eyes flew open in shock. The massive creature was retreating, moving backward with its gaze still locked on her face. Those golden eyes held something she couldn't name, some emotion that seemed out of place in a beast meant only for killing. Confusion, recognition, something that looked almost like hope struggling against despair. Before she could process what was happening, the wolf turned and vanished into the forest, leaving her standing alone, alive, completely bewildered. Ember stood frozen long after the wolf disappeared. Her mind struggled to process what had not happened. She was alive. The realization arrived slowly, like blood returning to a limb that had fallen asleep, bringing with it a strange pins and needles sensation of confused relief. Her bound hands trembled. She looked down at them as though they belonged to someone else, expecting to see claw marks or blood. There was nothing. Not even a scratch. Why had it spared her? The questions circled through her thoughts, finding no answer. Monsters didn't show mercy. Beasts didn't retreat from easy prey, yet the wolf had done exactly that, had looked at her with those impossible golden eyes and chosen to walk away. The memory of its regard sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with cold. Intelligence had lived behind that gaze. Awareness that felt disturbingly human despite the animal form. The forest remained unnaturally silent around her, as though holding its breath, waiting to see what she would do next. Ember became acutely aware that standing still made her vulnerable. Just because the wolf had not killed her immediately didn't mean it wouldn't return. Perhaps it was playing with her. Some cruel instinct to let fear ripen before the final strike. The thought mobilized her, forced her legs to move despite their trembling. She needed to find shelter. Somewhere defensible where she could rest and think without exposure on all sides. The bound hands complicated everything. made even simple movement an exercise in frustrated awkwardness. She tried working at the knots with her teeth, but whoever had tied them knew their craft well. The rope held firm, cutting deeper into her wrists with each futile attempt. Moving deeper into the forest felt counterintuitive. But returning to the edge where the pack had abandoned her seemed even more foolish. They would not welcome her back. If anything, her survival would be seen as failure. Evidence that she had not fulfilled her purpose. Better to press forward, hope for some cave or thick copse of trees that could provide minimal protection. The terrain grew rougher as she walked, the ground sloping upward in a gradual incline that suggested she was approaching higher elevation. Her lungs burned. Her legs ached. The white dress caught on branches and thorns, tearing in places. By the time the trees began to thin ahead, Ember was stumbling more than walking. What emerged from the undergrowth stole the remaining breath from her lungs. Ruins sprawled across a clearing that should not exist. Stone structures that had once been grand, now reclaimed by nature with patient inevitability. Ivy climbed crumbling walls thick as Ember's wrist. Trees grew through what had been windows or doorways, their roots breaking apart foundation stones with slow, inexorable strength. But even in decay, the architecture spoke of wealth and power that dwarfed anything in Pinewood territory. These had not been common buildings. The dressed stone, the careful joints, the sheer scale of construction all suggested something important had stood here. A palace, perhaps? Or a keep? Whoever had lived in this place commanded respect and resources on a level Ember had only heard about in stories. She moved closer, drawn by curiosity stronger than caution. Her bound hands made climbing over fallen masonry difficult, but she managed, driven by a need to understand what this place had been, why it had been abandoned, why it was forbidden. The central structure was largest, its walls still partially intact despite centuries of abandonment. She could trace the outline of a great hall, could see where rooms had branched off from it, where servants' quarters had been tucked into corners, where grand staircases had once connected different levels. It was on one of these partially standing walls that she found the first symbol. At first, it appeared to be merely decorative carving, the kind of ornamentation wealthy families commissioned to display their status and sophistication. But as Ember studied it more closely, she recognized intent beyond aesthetics. The symbol consisted of interlocking circles carved deep into the stone with a precision that suggested ritual rather than art. Within the circles, smaller symbols nested, some she recognized from the healing text her grandmother had shown her. Protection runes, lunar symbols marking the phases of the moon. Others were completely foreign, strange geometries that made her eyes water if she looked at them too long. She moved along the wall, finding more carvings. They seemed to tell a story, though she lacked the knowledge to fully read it. A figure that could be wolf or man surrounded by chains. A woman reaching toward the bound figure. Above them both, 3 moon phases rendered in careful detail. And beneath it all, words carved in a language that was almost familiar, but frustratingly just beyond comprehension. Ember traced the carvings with bound fingers, trying to decipher their meaning. The stone felt warm beneath her touch. Warmer than it should given the lack of direct sunlight, as if heat radiated from somewhere deep within the rock itself. Magic. The word appeared in her mind unbidden. These were not mere decorations, but active workings. Spells or wards set by someone with considerable power. A doorway gaped in the wall ahead, leading into what had been an interior room. The roof had long since collapsed, but enough walls remained to create a sheltered space. Ember ducked inside, her eyes adjusting to the deeper shadows. And there, carved into what had once been an altar, she found the message. Unlike the other symbols, this one was written in common script. Though the language felt archaic, formal in a way modern speech had abandoned. The words had been cut deep, meant to endure. And they had. Moss and lichen partially obscured the text, but Ember brushed it away with careful fingers, revealing the inscription beneath. Forged by treachery, bound by force. The cure dwells within the curse itself. What was stolen shall be returned when the moon recognizes her match. Ember read the words again, parsing each phrase for meaning. Someone had been betrayed. Someone had been bound through force. And there was a cure, though what illness or curse it addressed remained unclear. The final line proved most cryptic. When the moon recognizes her match. More symbols surrounded the text. These Ember understood better from her healing studies. She identified the glyph for wolf first. Rendered in stylized form that still captured the essence of the animal, beside it a woman's silhouette, arms raised as though invoking or offering something. And between them a third symbol she had seen before in her grandmother's oldest books. Always accompanied by warnings and cautious whispers. The mate bond, her breath caught. This was about mating. About the sacred connection that could form between wolves. But the configuration was wrong. Mate bonds were natural, spontaneous. They simply existed or they didn't. You couldn't force them. Couldn't create them through ritual or magic. Yet this altar spoke of deliberate creation. Or perhaps restoration. Of such a bond. What is this place? Ember whispered to the empty ruins. The wolf appeared so silently that she didn't realize she was no longer alone until she felt the displacement of air behind her. She spun, heart leaping into her throat, expecting attack. But the massive creature simply sat at the edge of the chamber, watching her with those impossible golden eyes that held the weight of 20 lost years in their amber depths. In the dimmer light, its coat appeared darker, the silver-gray shading to pewter in shadow. The wolf did not move toward her. It simply watched, head tilted slightly in what might have been curiosity, waiting for what Ember couldn't guess. You didn't kill me before, she said, keeping her voice level despite the fear still coiling in her chest. Why, Pike? No response. Of course not. It was an animal. However intelligent it might seem, animals did not speak, did not understand human words. Yet something in the way the wolf's ears swiveled toward her in the focus of its attention suggested comprehension beyond instinct. Ember turned back to the altar, though keeping the wolf in her peripheral vision. These markings speak of betrayal and binding, of curses and cures. She traced the wolf glyph with bound fingers. Someone was forced into this form, trapped here. Is that you? Are you the cursed one? The wolf rose to its feet. Ember's muscles tensed for flight, though she knew she could never outrun it. But instead of approaching the creature, moved to the opposite wall, nosing at a section of stone that appeared identical to the rest. It pawed once, twice, then looked back at her with clear intent. You want me to look there? The wolf's tail swished once, a gesture that felt distinctly affirmative. Ember approached cautiously, unsure what she would find. The stone the wolf had indicated looked solid, unremarkable. But when she pressed her bound hands against it, she felt the subtle give of a loose piece. With effort, she managed to work it free, revealing a hollow space beyond. Inside, carefully wrapped in oilcloth that had preserved it through the years, lay a book. Ember withdrew it with shaking hands. The weight was substantial, the binding clearly expensive even after so much time. She unwrapped the cloth with fumbling fingers, revealing a leather cover tooled with more of the same symbols she had seen throughout the ruins. When she opened it, the pages proved to be vellum, each one covered in neat script that showed the careful hand of someone accustomed to formal writing. A journal, or perhaps more accurately, a confession. The first page bore a date that made Ember's breath catch, 20 years ago, near to the month. And beneath it, a name she recognized from pack history, though it had not been spoken in her lifetime. Celeste Moonshadow. Ember began to read, and with each line, the world she thought she understood crumbled further. They came for me at midnight, warriors bearing the mark of the royal house, but acting under orders I knew to be false. My coven tried to protect me. We are healers and seers, not fighters. They cut down Mara and Isla before my eyes, their blood staining the sacred circle we had consecrated for peace. Beta Silas Grey stood over their bodies, gave me a choice, curse Alpha King Theron Nightfang, or watch every member of my coven die in the same manner. But it was not just Silas. Behind him stood the council elders. Old Garrett, Thomas of the High Ridge family, Margot, who now pretends to heal when once she helped plan murder. They voted, 5-0, sanctioned what came next as necessary for the good of the pack. I am not brave enough to let them all perish for principle. I agreed to their terms, to forge a curse that would strip Theron Nightfang of his humanity, trap him in wolf form, drive his mind toward beast consciousness until nothing of the man remained. But I am not without resistance. Into the curse itself, I wove its antidote. The mate bond, if true and freely given, can break what I was forced to create. The words blurred as Ember's hands began shaking harder. She forced herself to continue reading. The journal continued detailing the curse in technical terms she only partially understood, explaining the mechanism by which mate bonds could unravel magical compulsion. Celeste had been thorough, leaving instructions alongside her account, ensuring that whoever found this information would know how to proceed. Ember looked up from the pages to find the wolf watching her with an intensity that stole breath. Understanding crashed over her with the force of physical impact. This was not just any cursed creature. This was the Alpha King, the ruler who had supposedly abandoned his throne 20 years ago. Theron Nightfang, reduced to beast form by magic wielded under threat of genocide. And Rowan Blackthorn, the Alpha who currently ruled, was the Beta who had orchestrated it all. The magnitude of the deception left Ember reeling. How many years had Rowan maintained this charade? How many wolves believed the lies about their true king? And more pressing, more dangerous. What would Rowan do if he learned the truth might be discovered? Theron, she whispered. The wolf's ears pricked forward. Its entire body went still in a way that confirmed what she already knew. This was the Alpha King, reduced to beast form by magic wielded under threat. Betrayed not by one man, but by the entire pack leadership. By the very wolves who should have protected him. And Rowan Blackthorn had ruled on that foundation of lies for 20 years. Theron moved closer. This time Ember did not flinch away. He lowered his massive head, bringing his muzzle near her bound wrists. For a heartbeat, she thought he meant to bite, to free her through violence. Instead, he caught the rope between careful teeth and began to work at the knots with surprising dexterity. It took several minutes of patient effort, but eventually the rope loosened and fell away. Ember rubbed her abraded wrists, relief flooding through her as circulation fully returned. She met Theron's eyes, seeing them now with new understanding. Eyes that saw too much, understood too deeply, despite the animal form that imprisoned him. Can you transform, she asked? Can you become human again, even briefly? The way he dropped his gaze, the defeated slump of his shoulders, provided answer enough. Whatever magic bound him, it was not easily overcome. The curse held tight, and without the mate bond Celeste described, he would remain trapped. But the journal had mentioned the mate bond as cure, which meant Theron's true mate existed somewhere, waiting to be found. Ember's stomach twisted with complicated emotions she did not want to examine. Disappointment, no. That made no sense. She barely knew this creature, this king. Yet something in her recoiled from the thought of him finding another. of watching him transform back to human through someone else's love. Ridiculous. She pushed the feeling aside and focused on practical matters. We need to understand more, she said, gesturing to the journal. Celeste left detailed instructions. If we can find her, she might be able to help, to explain what needs to happen. Theron made a soft noise, somewhere between whine and growl. His attention fixed on her with unsettling focus. Then slowly, deliberately, he moved closer, until his muzzle rested against her collarbone. She felt him inhale deeply, scenting her as he had when they first met. The reaction was immediate and undeniable. His entire body went rigid, a shudder running through him from ears to tail. When he pulled back, his eyes had gone wide. Pupils dilated with something that looked like shock, or recognition, or perhaps desperate hope. And Ember felt it too, though she had no name for the sensation. A pull, magnetic and insistent, centering in her chest and spreading outward. Heat that had nothing to do with temperature. A rightness that defied logic. The mate bond, manifesting, recognizing. Oh no, she was the mate bond he needed. She was the cure Celeste had woven into the curse. Ember Ashwood, Omega, sacrifice. The girl her pack had sent to die. She was Theron Nightfang's true mate. The one who could break 20 years of imprisonment and return the Alpha King to his throne. The realization should have brought fear, should have felt like burden too heavy to carry. Instead, a strange calm settled over her, as though some part of her soul had been waiting for this discovery, preparing for it without her conscious knowledge. She looked at Theron, at the wolf who was somehow also a king, and saw the same recognition reflected in his eyes. The connection between them thrummed with warmth, undeniable, insistent as gravity, demanding acknowledgement. "This is impossible," she whispered, though her hands moved of their own accord to rest against his massive head. His fur was coarser than she expected, thick and warm beneath her fingers. He leaned into the touch with a sound that was almost human in its relief. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the ruins. Soon it would be full dark, and Ember had no shelter, no food, no plan beyond surviving the next few hours. But she was not alone. She had found the truth the pack had buried for 20 years, had discovered their greatest secret lying in wait among cursed ruins. The Alpha King lived, the mate bond existed, and everything Ember had been taught about the natural order, about her place in the hierarchy, about Omegas being worthless and disposable, all of it was built on the same foundation of lies that had stolen Theron's crown. They sent her here to die, to be forgotten, to purchase peace with her blood and never trouble their consciences again. Instead, she had found a king, and together they were going to burn that foundation of lies to ash. The realization should have terrified her. Instead, Ember felt something closer to inevitability settle into her bones, as though every choice she'd ever made, every path she'd walked had been leading her to this moment in these ruins with a cursed king whose golden eyes saw her as salvation. "This is impossible," she said again, but the words carried no conviction. Her hands remained buried in Theron's fur fingers, tracing the scars that marked his body like a map of 20 years spent surviving. "I'm an Omega. You're the Alpha King. Mate bonds don't cross such vast rank differences." Theron made a sound low in his chest. Not quite agreement, not quite protest. Just acknowledgement that the world rarely cared what was supposed to be possible. The sky above the ruins had deepened to purple. Night would fall soon, and with it would come cold. Ember had no supplies, no shelter beyond these broken walls, no food except what she might find growing wild. But she'd survived on less before. Vivian had made sure of that, teaching her stepdaughter that Omegas ate only after everyone else had their fill. "We should make camp," she said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "Find wood for a fire. See if there's water nearby." Theron pulled away from her touch and moved toward the edge of the clearing. He paused, looking back over his shoulder with clear expectation. "Follow me." Ember followed. He led her to a spring-fed pool tucked behind the main structure of water clear, and cold bubbling up from between moss-covered stones. She knelt and drank deeply, cupping water in her hands. It tasted of minerals and earth and something else she couldn't name. Something that made her skin prickle with awareness of the magic that saturated this place. While she drank, Theron vanished into the forest. She heard him moving through the undergrowth with surprising stealth for something his size. When he returned, he carried a rabbit in his jaws. Freshly killed neck, broken clean. He laid it at her feet with the matter-of-fact efficiency of someone accustomed to providing for himself. Ember stared at the offering, at this wolf who was also a man, who had hunted for her without being asked, who looked at her now with those impossible golden eyes and waited to see what she would do. She built a fire in what had once been a hearth using flint and steel she found in one of the storage rooms that had somehow remained dry through the years. This place had been well made, strong enough that even 2 decades of abandonment hadn't completely destroyed it. While the flames caught and grew, she prepared the rabbit. Her grandmother had taught her this, how to skin and clean game, how to cook over an open fire without burning the meat. The work steadied her hands, gave her something to focus on besides the massive wolf watching her every movement with unnerving intensity. As the meat cooked, Ember studied Celeste's journal more carefully, reading by firelight, learning the history her pack had worked so hard to erase. Theron Nightfang had become Alpha King at 22. Young for such responsibility, but he'd proven himself worthy through strength and strategy both. For 6 years, he'd ruled with a vision that threatened every comfortable assumption the old families had built their power upon. He'd elevated Omegas, given them rights to own property, to choose their own mates, to refuse assignments they deemed too dangerous. He'd made warrior ranks something earned through merit rather than inherited through bloodline. He'd challenged the Council's authority to hoard resources while lower-ranked wolves starved. The old families had hated him for it, had called his reforms dangerous, disruptive, an attack on the natural order that had served them so well for generations. And Rowan Blackthorn, his trusted beta, had listened to their complaints, had seen opportunity in their resentment, had begun to plant seeds of doubt about his Alpha King's judgment, his sanity, his fitness to rule. It had taken 3 years of careful manipulation, but eventually Rowan had convinced enough of the Council that Theron posed a threat, that he had to be removed for the good of the pack. That exile wasn't enough because he might return with allies. That death was too quick, too kind. They'd chosen something worse, something that would trap Theron's consciousness inside an animal body, that would slowly erode his humanity until nothing remained but instinct and rage. That would transform him into the very monster they claimed he'd always been, and they'd force Celeste to be the instrument of their cruelty. The journal described it in clinical detail. The poison Rowan had slipped into Theron's wine during a feast, liquid silver burning through his system, weakening him just enough that he couldn't fight when the warriors came. When they dragged him before the Council and pronounced their sentence, Celeste had been brought in chains, made to watch as Silas Gray held a blade to her coven sister's throat, made to choose between cursing her king or watching innocents die for the crime of standing in powerful men's way. She'd chosen the curse, but not without rebellion woven into its very structure. The mate bond could break it. That was the antidote Celeste had hidden in plain sight. True love freely given by the woman the fates had marked as Theron's other half. Physical union that sealed the bond completely. Ancient words spoken under a full moon's light. Simple in theory, impossible in practice when the cursed wolf couldn't speak. Couldn't explain what he needed. Could only hunt and hide and slowly lose himself to the beast consciousness creeping through his mind. Like frost. 20 years. Theron had survived 20 years. Ember looked up from the journal to find him lying near the firehead resting on massive paws, watching her read with an expression that was far too human for comfort. "How much do you understand?" she asked quietly. "How much of the man is still there?" His ears flicked forward, a clear indication that he'd heard, that he comprehended. "Can you remember your life before your reign?" A soft whine, sadness and frustration tangled together. Pieces, Ember guessed. Fragments. The curse took the details but left the emotions. Theron's tail twitched once. Agreement. She set the journal aside and pulled the cooked rabbit from the fire, tore off a piece of meat and offered it to him. He took it gently from her fingers, careful not to let his teeth touch her skin. They ate in silence, sharing the meal while darkness settled fully over the ruins. When they'd finished, Ember moved to sit with her back against the stone wall legs drawn up to conserve warmth. The fire burned low but steady, enough light to keep the worst of the shadows at bay. Theron rose and padded over to her. Without ceremony, he settled beside her, curling his massive body around hers, offering warmth and protection both. Ember's breath caught. Their bond sang in her blood where they touched. A pull so strong it made her chest ache. Heat that had nothing to do with his fur or the fire. Just pure rightness. Recognition on a level deeper than thought. "Tomorrow," she whispered, "we need to decide what to do." Celeste wrote that she fled to the Mistborn Valleys, north into the Cascades. If we can find her, she might help us break the curse completely. Theron made a rumbling sound that might have been agreement. "But Rowan will send people. When Silas reports back that I'm alive, that the wolf didn't kill me, they'll come looking. They can't afford to let me return with what I know." Another rumble, this one darker, more threatening. Ember turned her head to look at him, at this wolf who was also a king. This cursed creature who somehow made her feel safer than she'd felt in her entire life. "I'm not afraid," she said, and realized it was true. "I should be. I'm an Omega with no training, no weapons, no allies. But I look at you and I just feel..." She trailed off, searching for words that could describe the sensation thrumming through her veins. "Right," she finished quietly. "You feel right." Theron shifted. His body went tense, and then it began to convulse. Ember scrambled back, giving him space as his form twisted. The transformation was nothing like the smooth shifts she'd witnessed among her pack. This was violence. Magic forcing flesh to obey against every instinct, screaming resistance. His bones broke. She could hear them crack and reshape, could see the way his limbs contorted at angles that should have been impossible. The sound that tore from his throat was neither howl nor human scream, but something caught agonizingly between. It lasted 3 minutes that felt eternal. When finally the spasms ceased, a man lay where the wolf had been. Even in obvious pain, even with his body still trembling from the ordeal Theron Nightfang was arresting. Sharp features softened by full lips currently pressed thin against discomfort. Dark hair fell to his shoulders, tangled and unkempt. His body bore the marks of 20 years lived as something hunted. Lean muscle carved from necessity rather than vanity. Scars crossing his torso and arms in patterns that told stories of survival. He opened his eyes and they remained that impossible gold. The curse hadn't released him fully, only granted temporary reprieve. How long? Ember asked, her throat tight. 10 minutes. Each syllable emerged with visible effort, voice hoarse from decades of silence. Never more than that. The curse pulls me back. 10 minutes. Barely time to speak a handful of sentences before the agony would claim him again. Theron tried to push himself upright. Failed. Tried again with stubborn determination that reminded Ember of the wolf who'd worked patiently at the ropes binding her wrists. She moved to help him, offering her shoulder for support. He hesitated before accepting, and she felt the exact moment their skin made contact. Heat bloomed where they touched, their bond recognizing and celebrating the connection. Theron's sharp intake of breath told her he felt it too. The journal he managed once he could sit without swaying. You found Celeste's confession. She detailed everything, the council vote, the forced curse, the mate bond that can break it. Ember paused, searching his face. Did you know that she'd woven in a cure? Suspected. The first few years before the beast's consciousness got too strong, I could feel something. A thread of possibility woven through the curse. But I couldn't. He stopped, frustration tightening his jaw. The wolf can't speak, can't explain, can barely think clearly enough to plan. I lost so much. Names, faces, specific memories, just fragments left. Emotions without context. You remembered how to survive. Survival is instinct. Everything else requires humanity. His golden eyes found hers. 20 years. I've been trapped for 20 years. Feeling myself slip away piece by piece. Becoming more animal, less man. Fighting every day to hold on to something, anything that proved I was still Theron Nightfang and not just a beast wearing his skin. Ember's chest tightened. But you are still you. You showed me the journal. Protected me when you should have killed me. That's not a beast. That's a man fighting against impossible odds and refusing to surrender. For how much longer? The question emerged barely above a whisper. How much longer before there's nothing left to fight with, before the wolf wins and Theron dies without anyone knowing or caring? I care. The words came out fiercer than Ember intended. I'm an Omega who was supposed to die as a sacrifice. Instead, I found the truth they buried. Found you. And I'm not walking away from that. We're going to break this curse. You don't know what you're offering. Theron leaned closer despite the warning in his words. Close enough that she could see flecks of darker gold in his irises. The mate bond is permanent, sacred. You tie yourself to me for all your remaining years based on words in a journal in a pull you can barely understand. I understand enough. The bond exists whether we complete it or not. I feel it. Like gravity. Like breathing. Like something fundamental to who I am that I didn't know was missing until I found it. She held his gaze steadily. You need me to break the curse. But more than that, I need this. I need to matter. To be more than the worthless Omega they tried to throw away. And you see me. Not my rank. Not my lack of value in their eyes. Just me. Theron's hand came up to cup her face. His palm, rough with calluses, earned through 2 decades of using paws instead of fingers. His thumb traced her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. You matter, he said, and the conviction in his voice made something crack open in Ember's chest. You've always mattered. The fact that they couldn't see it just proves how blind they've chosen to be. The transformation seized him before she could respond, bones cracking as his body convulsed away from hers. Ember held him through it, ignoring his attempts to push her away, refusing to let him endure the agony alone. When the wolf finally emerged, she remained close, one hand resting on his shoulder until the shaking subsided. We leave at dawn, she told him. Find Celeste. Break the curse, and then we make them face what they've done. Theron's golden eyes held hers. Then he pressed his massive head against her chest. Over her heart, where their bond pulsed with warmth and certainty. Ember wrapped her arms around his neck and held on. They came for her 3 days later. The morning had dawned cold and gray mist clinging to the ruins like shrouds. Ember had been gathering herbs from the overgrown garden she'd found behind what used to be the kitchens. Plants that Celeste must have cultivated decades ago, still growing wild and resilient. Theron's ears pricked forward. His entire body went tense. That low growl building in his chest that meant danger approaching. Ember straightened, her pulse quickening. How many? His nose tested the air. 3, maybe. Moving through the forest without attempting stealth. They wanted to be heard. Wanted whatever dwelled in these ruins to know they approached. Hunters confident in their superiority over prey. Theron positioned himself between Ember and the direction the scent came from. Every line of his body screamed warning and promised both. Touch her and die. The first figure emerged from the tree line and Ember's stomach dropped. She recognized Beta Silas Gray immediately. His broad shoulders and battle-scarred face unmistakable, even at distance. Behind him came 2 younger warriors, both carrying silver-tipped spears that glinted in the weak morning light. They had come prepared to kill. Silas stopped at the clearing's edge. His gaze swept across the ruins before settling on the chamber where Theron stood guard. His eyes widened fractionally when he spotted Ember. Alive. Unharmed. Clearly not dead as she should have been. The Omega survives, Silas called out. His voice carried the kind of authority that came from years commanding others. Alpha Rowan will be relieved. We feared the beast had taken you. Ember stepped forward before Theron could stop her. though his warning growl told her exactly what he thought of that decision. She kept one hand on his back, fingers buried in thick fur, maintaining connection while facing the warriors. I am well as you can see. You may return to the Alpha and tell him his sacrifice was unnecessary. Silas's expression hardened, something darker than mere displeasure moving behind his eyes. You will return with us. The pack has mourned your loss. Your family wishes to see you restored to them. The lie was transparent. Her family hadn't mourned. They'd celebrated her absence. And Rowan would never allow her return, not when she might speak of what she'd discovered in these ruins. I choose to remain here, Ember said, proud when her voice emerged steady despite the fear coiling in her gut. One of the younger warriors stepped forward, spear raised, aggression written across features still soft with youth. You don't have a choice, Omega. You belong to the pack. Theron's snarl erupted with explosive violence, lips pulling back to reveal teeth designed for tearing flesh. The sound filled the clearing, primal, terrifying, a promise of exactly how quickly he could end them all if they pushed. The young warrior stumbled backward, nearly dropped his weapon. Even Silas shifted his weight, reassessing the threat before him. The beast protects her. Silas's tone had changed, gone thoughtful rather than afraid. Interesting. It should have killed her days ago. Perhaps it's not the mindless creature Rowan claims. Ember let the words hang in the air between them, watching for his reaction. Silas's face revealed nothing, but the warriors exchanged uneasy glances. They'd been raised on stories of the cursed wolf, of the monster that existed only to destroy. Seeing it stand guard over an Omega rather than slaughter her challenged everything they believed. Tell Rowan the truth, Ember said, making a decision that felt both inevitable and terrifying. Tell him I know what he did. Silence fell heavy as stone. Tell him I found Celeste Moonshadow's journal, that I understand how he poisoned his Alpha King and forced a curse upon an innocent man, that I know his reign was built on betrayal and murder. The warriors stared at her as though she'd grown a second head, confusion and disbelief warring across their features. But Silas went very still, the stillness of a predator deciding whether to strike or retreat. You speak madness, he said finally. There is no Alpha King. Theron Nightfang abandoned his throne 20 years past. Theron Nightfang stands before you. Ember's voice rang clear across the clearing. Trapped in wolf form by magic Rowan compelled through violence. The journal documents everything. The poisoning, the threats, the execution of innocents to force compliance. Your Alpha is a liar and usurper. Silas's hand moved to the sword at his hip. Careful, Omega. Such words could be considered treason. Truth is not treason. I have proof. Written confession from the witch who cast the curse. Rowan cannot hide behind his lies forever. The beta studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped lower, more dangerous. You truly believe this creature is the Lost King? I know he is. Then you are as cursed as the beast. Silas turned to the warriors. We return to report what we found. Alpha Rowan will decide how to proceed. They withdrew into the forest, moving quickly now that subtlety served no purpose. Ember watched them disappear among the trees, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had just declared war on the most powerful wolf in the kingdom. The moment the warriors passed beyond sight, Theron's body convulsed. The transformation took him hard and fast, bones breaking with sounds that made Ember flinch despite growing accustomed to the violence of it. When finally he emerged in human form, gasping against the pain, she was there to steady him. That was dangerous. His words came rough and halting as though his tongue had forgotten the shape of human speech. Rowan knows now. He'll move against us. He was always going to move against us. Ember helped him sit, noting with concern how the transformations left him increasingly exhausted. The curse was fighting back, resisting their bond's erosion of its power. At least now he knows we understand his crimes. Theron's laugh held no humor. Understanding and proving are different things. He'll come with enough warriors to overwhelm us. Will kill us both before we can speak to anyone who matters. Then we don't give him the chance. Ember pulled Celeste's journal from where she'd hidden it in her dress. The witch is our witness. With her testimony, with proof of the forced curse, the pack might believe us. Might turn against Rowan. Can you remember where her coven dwells? Frustration twisted Theron's features. Pieces, fragments. The curse took so much, but there were mountains to the north. Valleys hidden by permanent mist, places where magic runs deep and old. The Mistborn Valleys in the North Cascades. How far? 4 days, maybe 5, if we have to stay cautious. 4 days of hard travel while Rowan gathered his forces. 4 days of hoping they could stay ahead of pursuit. 4 days to reach the only person who could help them break the curse completely before Rowan arrived with overwhelming force. We leave now, Ember decided. No point waiting for them to surround us. Theron reached for her hand, his touch still sending heat through her where their bond pulsed between them. If we're caught, Rowan will not grant quick deaths. He cannot afford to let either of us speak. Then we won't be caught. She squeezed his fingers, already planning how to turn Rowan's own lies against him if they cross paths with his warriors. We're stronger together. The bond proves that. Let me stand at your side. The transformation pulled him back before he could argue further, his body racking with spasms as the curse dragged him to wolf form. When it finished, when Theron stood on 4 legs again, With golden eyes burning with frustrated rage at his own helplessness, Ember gathered what few supplies they had, wrapped the journal carefully in oiled cloth, filled a water skin from the spring, took flint and steel for making fire. Everything else they would find along the way or do without. They moved north into terrain that grew progressively wilder. The forest here was older than anything near Pinewood territory. Trees so massive their trunks blocked out the sky. Undergrowth thick enough that passage required finding game trails invisible to untrained eyes. But Theron navigated with confidence born of intimate knowledge. 20 years of survival as a hunted creature had taught him every hidden path, every stream that could mask a scent trail, every hollow where a wolf could hide. Now those skills would serve them both. By midday, they reached a river running swift with snowmelt from distant peaks. The water was cold enough to steal breath, deep enough that Ember would need help crossing. She could swim, but not well, and the current looked treacherous. Theron plunged in without hesitation, powerful legs propelling him across despite the river's best efforts to drag him downstream. He reached the far bank and shook water from his coat in a spray of diamond droplets, then looked back at Ember with clear expectation. Your turn. She took a breath and stepped into the water. The cold shocked through her immediately, made her gasp, made her muscles seize. She pushed forward anyway. One step, then another. The current pulled at her legs, tried to sweep her feet from under her. Halfway across, Theron's body went rigid. Ember recognized the signs immediately. No, not now. Not in the middle of the river where transformation would leave him vulnerable and possibly drowning. But the curse didn't care about timing or convenience. His form began to twist, wolf to man, while the current raged around him. Ember lunged forward, grabbed his arm as his body convulsed, used every ounce of strength she possessed to keep his head above water, while bones broke and reformed. The transformation seemed to last forever, the river trying to tear them both downstream. Ember's feet scrambling for purchase on slick stones, her arms burning with the effort of holding him steady. When finally Theron emerged human, he was gasping. Choking on water he'd inhaled, Ember dragged him toward the far bank with strength she didn't know she possessed, hauled him onto shore, and rolled him onto his side so he could cough up what he'd swallowed. Breathe, she commanded, her own lungs heaving. Just breathe. He did, eventually. When his breathing steadied, when color returned to his face, he looked at her with something that might have been wonder. You saved me. Of course I did. Ember collapsed beside him on the riverbank, every muscle trembling from exertion and cold. We're in this together. I told you that. Most people would have let me drown, saved themselves. I'm not most people. Theron's hand found hers, tangling their fingers together where they lay in the dirt and moss. No, you're not. They rested through the afternoon on the riverbank, Ember's head on Theron's shoulder while their clothes dried in weak sunlight, filtering through the canopy. For these stolen moments, there was no Rowan pursuing them, no curse fighting to reassert control, no kingdom waiting to be reclaimed, just two souls who had found each other against impossible odds, who had chosen each other when the world said they shouldn't exist together. Tell me about your mother, Theron said quietly. Sarah, the one you'd name our daughter after. Ember smiled despite the ache in her chest. She grew herbs in a garden twice the size of our cottage, said plants responded to love as much as soil and water. She taught me that healing wasn't just about knowing which leaf stopped bleeding. It was about seeing the whole person, their pain, their fear, their hope. She would be proud of you. She would have liked you. Ember turned her head to look at him, would have seen past the curse to the man you are, the king you'll be again. Theron's hand found hers, fingers intertwining. When this is over, when the throne is reclaimed and the kingdom rebuilt, we plant a garden, in her memory. In her memory, Ember agreed, and for a moment the future felt not just possible but certain. When she woke, he was wolf again, but he remained close, head resting on her lap, watching over her sleep with those impossible golden eyes. They traveled until darkness made continuing dangerous, made camp in a dense thicket where fallen logs created natural shelter. Theron vanished into the forest and returned with a grouse, fresh killed. Ember built a small fire and cooked the meat while he stood guard at the clearing's edge. Tomorrow we need to be more careful, she said while they ate. Rowan will send trackers. They'll look for our trail. Theron's ears swiveled toward her, agreement. But you know this forest better than any of them. 20 years of hiding taught you things they'll never learn. We use that advantage. He moved closer, pressed his muzzle against her shoulder, a gesture that felt unmistakably like reassurance. I'll keep you safe. The third day brought them into terrain that felt different. The air itself held weight here, dense with magic so old Ember could taste it on her tongue. Trees grew twisted, their branches forming patterns that seemed deliberately shaped rather than naturally grown. Even the ground beneath her feet felt alive, pulsing with energy that raised the fine hairs along her arms. We're close, she said, though she had no rational reason to believe it. The feeling simply existed, bone-deep certainty that Celeste's coven dwelt nearby. Theron's ears pricked forward, his nose testing the wind, then he moved with purpose. Leading her up a steep incline where loose stone made every step treacherous, Ember climbed carefully, using roots and exposed rocks for handholds, trusting Theron's guidance even when her own senses screamed they were ascending toward nothing. At the summit, the world opened into something impossible. A valley stretched below them, hidden so completely that Ember understood immediately why no one had found Celeste's coven in 20 years. Permanent mist filled the depression, glowing faintly with its own luminescence. Through the shifting white, she caught glimpses of structures. Small cottages arranged in a circle around a central clearing. Protective wards shimmered at the valley's entrance, visible only because the setting sun caught them at the right angle. Layers upon layers of magic woven tight enough to keep out anything unwanted. "How do we pass?" Ember asked. Theron's response was to step forward, allowing his body to make contact with the magical barrier. Light blazed where fur met ward, spreading outward in ripples like stones thrown into still water. For a heartbeat, Ember feared they would be repelled, thrown back, or worse. Then the magic recognized something in Theron, some mark of kingship or residue from Celeste's original curse. And the barrier opened. They descended into the valley together, mist closing around them until Ember could see barely 3 paces ahead. She kept one hand on Theron's shoulder, letting him guide her through the disorienting white. Shapes moved in the fog, human forms that watched their approach but did not interfere. At the valley floor, the mist thinned enough to reveal the coven properly. 20 cottages formed a circle, each showing signs of careful maintenance despite the isolation. In the central clearing, a bonfire burned despite the lack of any visible wood, magical flames casting no heat but plenty of light. And beside that fire stood a woman whose face Ember recognized from Celeste's journal descriptions. Violet eyes, dark hair threaded with silver, lines marking a face that might have been beautiful once before grief carved valleys through it. Celeste Moonshadow looked at them with an expression that held no surprise, as though she'd been waiting 20 years for exactly this moment. "Theron Nightfang," she said, her voice carrying across the clearing with unexpected warmth. "After 2 decades, you finally come home." Theron transformed, the change flowing more smoothly than ever before, though pain still marked his features. When he stood human once more, he met Celeste's gaze steadily. "You left me a way out of the curse. We found your journal, your instructions." He gestured to Ember. "This is Ember Ashwood. She's my mate." Celeste's attention shifted to Ember, those unsettling violet eyes seeming to see through skin to the soul beneath, to measure and weigh and judge in the space of a heartbeat. "The mate bond manifests already. I can see the mark beginning on her neck." Celeste moved closer, but it's not yet complete. "Rowan knows we live," Ember said quickly, "knows we found the journal. He'll come with warriors, with silver weapons meant to kill. We need the curse broken before then. 20 years I've waited for this moment." Celeste reached out to touch Theron's face with fingers that trembled slightly. 20 years wondering if my resistance, my hidden cure, would ever be discovered. She dropped her hand, stepped back. "Tell me, my king, do you remember what I said when Rowan forced me to cast the curse?" Theron's brow furrowed. "Pieces, fragments. You said it could be undone, that I shouldn't lose hope." "I said more than that." Celeste's expression held sympathy alongside steel. "I said the mate bond would break what I was forced to create, but only if the bond completed fully. Half measures will not suffice." She paused, making sure they understood. "You must complete the mating ritual. Allow the bond to seal entirely before the curse will release its hold. Physical union with conscious acceptance from both parties. The claiming and the choice made simultaneously." Heat flooded Ember's face, but she kept her voice steady. "What does the ritual require?" "Tomorrow night when the moon rises full. The timing matters, amplifies the bond's power. Attempted too soon and the curse may resist successfully. One more day, one more night, and Rowan was coming." Celeste seemed to read the thought on Ember's face. "He is coming. I can see it. Rowan brings 30 warriors, perhaps more. Silver weapons and chains forged specifically to bind shifters. He comes prepared for war." "Will you testify?" Ember asked. "When we face him, when we expose his crimes, will you speak the truth before the pack?" "I will do more than testify." Celeste's expression hardened. "My magic can project memories. Allow others to witness what occurred 20 years past. Rowan will face not just accusation, but irrefutable proof of his betrayal." Around them, other coven members had emerged from their cottages, drawn by the commotion. They stared at Theron with expressions ranging from awe to grief, seeing their king restored after decades believing him lost. An elderly woman stepped forward, tears tracking down weathered cheeks. "Your Majesty, forgive us. We couldn't protect you." Theron's voice was rough with emotion. "There's nothing to forgive. You survived. That's what matters." The coven welcomed them, offered food and shelter. Ember ate mechanically, her mind already focused on the coming confrontation. Tomorrow night, the curse would break. Tomorrow night, Theron would reclaim his humanity fully. And then they would ride to face Rowan, to tear down the lies and restore truth, if they survived that long. The day passed with agonizing slowness, each hour stretching like pulled thread. Ember spent the morning with Celeste in the witch's cottage, a small structure surprisingly warm despite the perpetual mist that filled the valley. The interior smelled of dried herbs and old magic, bundles hanging from ceiling beams alongside crystals that caught what little light filtered through the windows. Ancient texts lay spread across a scarred wooden table, their pages yellowed with age, but the ink still dark and clear. Celeste's violet eyes tracked Ember's expressions, ensuring comprehension of each crucial detail. The ritual requires perfect precision, Celeste explained, her finger tracing symbols that made Ember's eyes water if she looked at them too long. One misstep, one incorrectly pronounced syllable, and the curse may resist breaking. Or worse, it could fracture partially. Leave Theron trapped between forms. Neither wolf nor man, but something caught in eternal agony between the two. Ember's stomach clenched at the possibility. She had witnessed the violence of Theron's transformations, seen how the curse tore at him with every shift between wolf and human. To imagine him caught permanently in that liminal space, that moment of breaking bones and tearing flesh, was unbearable. "Tell me everything," she said. "I will not fail him." As Celeste's expression softened with something approaching approval. The bond requires three elements of working in harmony. First, conscious acceptance from both parties. Spoken aloud under the full moon's direct light. The words must be your own, from your heart, but they must contain acknowledgement of choice. She paused, ensuring Ember absorbed this foundation before continuing. The mate bond is sacred because it is freely given, never compelled. You must both state clearly that you choose this, that you understand what it means, that you accept all that comes with binding your souls together for as long as you both draw breath. Ember nodded. That part felt simple enough. She had already chosen. Had chosen the moment she understood what Theron was, what he'd endured, what he could become again if given the chance. Second, Celeste continued, physical union that seals the connection through flesh and blood. This is not merely coupling, though. That is part of it. The marking must occur. Theron's teeth breaking your skin to leave his claim visible to all. The pain will be sharp but brief. And from it comes the permanent bond that ties your souls together. Ember touched the back of her neck where she could feel the mark already beginning to form. Warm beneath her fingers. Their bond had been manifesting gradually over their days together, but completion required this final step. And the third element, she asked, the invocation, binding words in the old language. The tongues spoken before kingdoms rose and fell, before pacts formed their hierarchies. These words carry power because they have been used for this purpose since wolves first learned to love. Celeste stood and moved to a shelf lined with scrolls, selected one carefully, and brought it back to the table. Unrolled it to reveal text written in a script that predated anything Ember had ever seen. I will teach them to you now, and you must practice until they flow as naturally as breath. For the next 3 hours, Celeste drilled the phrases in Ember's memory. The words tasted strange on her tongue, syllables that seemed to resonate with something deeper than mere sound. Each phrase held specific meaning, one for acceptance, one for binding, one for sealing the bond against any who might try to break it. Ember repeated them until her throat grew raw, until Celeste finally nodded satisfaction. You have the pronunciation correct. Tonight, when the moment comes, let your heart guide the cadence. The words carry their own power, but your intent shapes how that power manifests. As afternoon shadows lengthened, Theron joined them. He had spent his morning with the Coven's eldest members, warriors who had served under his reign and remembered what it meant to follow a true king. They recounted stories of his leadership, of the justice he had brought to territories long plagued by corruption and violence. Ember saw how their words affected him, how he carried the weight of 20 lost years on his shoulders like physical burden, the guilt of those who had suffered because he'd been unable to protect them, unable to stop Rowan's lies from taking root. When they found a moment alone walking through the mist-shrouded valley, Ember took his hand. They speak of you with reverence, she said quietly. They never stopped believing you would return. Theron's jaw tightened, the muscle jumping beneath his beard. They endured 20 years of exile because of my failure to see Rowan's betrayal coming. 2 of their number died to force Celeste's compliance. How can they look at me with anything but accusation? Ember stopped walking, turned to face him fully. Because you are not responsible for Rowan's choices. He poisoned you, threatened innocence, built his power on lies and murder. That guilt belongs to him alone. I should have seen it, pain-colored Theron's voice. The old wound still raw despite 2 decades having passed. Should have recognized his ambition, his resentment. The signs were there and I ignored them because he was my friend, my trusted beta. That blindness cost everything. Then do not be blind now. She gripped his hands tighter. Rowan is coming. Celeste's magic showed us that truth in the scrying bowl this morning. He brings 30 warriors, maybe more, and he intends to end this before you can reclaim your throne. We break the curse tonight, and then we face him together. Theron pulled her close, drawing her in until their faces were a breath apart. You should not have to face battle. You were meant to die as sacrifice, and instead you offer yourself to restore a king you never knew. I have given you nothing but danger. You gave me purpose. Ember's voice was fierce. You gave me a choice when all my life choices were made for me by others. And you gave me this. She touched the mate mark on her neck, feeling the warmth pulse beneath her skin. I'm not afraid of what comes next. The afternoon passed in preparation. The Coven created a sacred circle in the clearing, using salt and crushed crystals that gleamed faintly with their own luminescence. They wove protective wards around the valley's perimeter, strengthening the barriers that had kept them hidden for 20 years. Warriors checked weapons and armor, preparing for the confrontation that would follow the ritual. Old swords were sharpened, silver chains inspected for weakness. everyone understanding that tomorrow would bring blood regardless of how tonight's ritual proceeded. As dusk approached, Ember bathed in a spring-fed pool the coven maintained, washing away the dirt and exhaustion of travel. Other coven members assisted her, braiding her hair with threads of silver, decorating her skin with symbols meant to amplify the mate bond's power. They dressed her in a simple white shift, traditional garb for one about to be claimed. The fabric was soft against her skin, light enough to feel almost like wearing nothing. She looked at her reflection in the still pool water and barely recognized herself. 23 years old, Omega who was meant to die forgotten, now standing on the edge of completing a mate bond with an Alpha King, preparing to help break an ancient curse and reshape a kingdom. Her mother Sarah would be proud. Her grandmother Eleanor would smile. This was who she was meant to be. The moon rose full and luminous, its light transforming the mist-filled valley into something ethereal and otherworldly. The entire coven gathered in a circle around the sacred space they had prepared, magical flames casting dancing shadows across upturned faces. Theron stood at the center, wearing ceremonial robes in deep blue that marked him as royalty. His dark hair had been combed back from his face, his beard trimmed neatly. He looked every inch the king he had been, the ruler he would become again. When his eyes found Ember across the clearing, their bond flared with such intensity it stole her breath. Want and need and love so profound it bordered on pain, all tangled together in the connection that pulsed between them. She moved toward him through the parted coven members, her bare feet silent on earth that had been consecrated for this purpose. Celeste stood beside the sacred circle, her hands already raised to begin the ritual. Theron Nightfang, the witch's voice carried across the clearing. Alpha King of these lands, and all who dwell within them. Do you stand before witnesses to claim your mate? I do. Theron's voice rang clear, carrying weight that came from absolute certainty. Ember Ashwood, Omega who was cast out and offered as sacrifice. Do you stand before witnesses to accept your mate? Ember's voice emerged steadier than she felt. I do. Then speak your acceptance. Let the words come from your hearts, witnessed by the full moon and bound by the magic that flows through these sacred grounds. Theron took Ember's hands in his grip firm and warm, real and solid and right. I choose you, Ember. His words held raw honesty that made her chest ache. Not because fate demanded it, not because the mate bond drew us together, but because you saw a beast and chose to see the man beneath. You gave me hope when I had forgotten such things existed. You stood beside me when wisdom would have counseled flight. I choose you as my mate, my Luna, my equal in all things, from this night until the end of my days. Tears pricked Ember's eyes. She gripped his hands tighter, letting her own truth spill forth. I choose you, Theron. When I should have died in that forest, you spared me. When I needed protection, you provided it. When I needed purpose, you showed me I could be more than what others decided for me. I choose you not just as king, but as the man who held me through pain, who shared his broken pieces and trusted me with them. I choose you from this night until the end of my days. Power flooded the clearing the moment their declarations completed, their bond blazing to life with such force that several coven members gasped aloud. Golden light erupted from where Theron and Ember stood clasped hands, spreading outward in waves that made the protective wards shimmer and strengthen. The air itself seemed to vibrate, magic older than memory, responding to vows spoken with perfect truth. Celeste's voice came distant now, as though she spoke from very far away. Then let the claiming commence. The coven withdrew, granting privacy while maintaining the sacred circle's integrity. Theron drew Ember close, his hands gentle despite the urgency thrumming through their bond. She felt his desire, his love, his desperate need to complete what they had started. And beneath it all, she felt the curse beginning to fracture, sensing the completion of the bond approaching, knowing its time was ending. Their union was both sacred and primal, bodies moving together in the ancient dance that had sealed mate bonds since wolves first walked the earth. When Theron's teeth found the junction of her neck and shoulder marking her as his, in the traditional way the pain was sharp and bright before transforming into pleasure. So intense, Ember cried out. The old words spilled from both their lips simultaneously, the syllables Celeste had taught them, flowing with power that resonated through earth and air, through bone and blood and spirit. Light erupted from where their bodies connected, golden and brilliant, spreading outward in waves that made the watching coven shield their eyes against the brilliance. Theron's body convulsed. But this was different from the agonizing transformations the curse had forced upon him for 20 years. This was magic being unmade, chains dissolving, freedom returning after an imprisonment that had lasted far too long. The light intensified until Ember had to close her eyes against it. But she held Theron through it, their bond anchoring them both as the curse shattered into fragments that dissolved like mist in sunlight. When finally the light faded and Ember could see again, Theron remained fully human. No tremors preceded unwanted transformation. No pull dragged him back toward wolf form against his will. He looked at his hands with wonder, flexing fingers that would remain human for as long as he wills them. Tears tracked down his face as 20 years of captivity finally ended. The celebration was brief. Dawn came too quickly, and with it came the sound of war horns echoing through the mountains. Rowan had arrived. Theron stood before his assembled warriors and the coven members who had lived in exile for 2 decades. his newly restored humanity radiating power that even the youngest among them could feel. The mate mark on Ember's neck glowed faintly in the dawnlight, answering the mark that had manifested on Theron's shoulder during their ritual. Two halves of one whole, bound now beyond any curse's ability to separate. But victory carried a bitter edge. Even as they'd celebrated the curse's breaking, even as Celeste had embraced her king with tears of joy streaming down her face, a commotion had erupted at the valley's entrance. The protective wards that had hidden this sanctuary for 20 years shimmered and buckled, strained by the force of those who pressed against them from outside. Celeste's expression had darkened immediately, her senses extending through the magical barriers. He's here. Rowan brings his warriors. 30, at least perhaps more, silver weapons and chains forged specifically to bind shifters. He comes prepared for war. Now, as the first light of morning broke over the valley, Theron addressed those who would stand with him. I will not ask you to fight my battles. His voice carried across the clearing without effort, the authority of a king who had never truly lost his crown. You have suffered enough because of Rowan's crimes. But if you choose to stand with me, if you choose to help me reclaim what was stolen, I swear on my mate bond that I will never again allow such injustice to stand unchallenged. The eldest warrior stepped forward, a grizzled man whose scars spoke of countless battles fought and survived. We have waited 20 years for this, my king. We will not abandon you now when victory is finally within reach. Others echoed his sentiment, voices rising in a chorus of loyalty that made Ember's chest tight with emotion. These wolves had lost everything when Rowan's coup succeeded, had been forced to flee or face execution for the crime of serving their rightful king. Now they would finally have the chance to set things right. Ember moved to stand beside Theron, ignoring his immediate look of protest. I am your Luna now. Where you go, I follow. The mate bond demands nothing less. You have no weapons, no armor. This will be brutal, Ember. Rowan will not hesitate to kill you if given the opportunity. Then do not give him that opportunity. She met his golden eyes steadily. We are stronger together. The bond proves that. Let me stand at your side. Before Theron could argue further, the ward shattered. Magic exploded outward in a wave of displaced energy that flattened grass and sent several coven members stumbling. Through the breach poured warriors in formation, their armor polished and weapons drawn. At their head strode Rowan Blackthorn, his face a mask of cold fury as he took in the scene before him. His gaze found Theron immediately, recognition and rage warring in his expression. For a long moment, silence held. Then Rowan laughed, the sound devoid of humor. Hollow as wind through dead trees. Impossible. The curse should have held. You should still be beast, trapped and mindless. His attention shifted to Ember, to the mate mark visible on her neck. The Omega broke it. How fitting that my carefully laid plans unravel because I underestimated the weakest among us. Theron's voice cut through the morning air, sharp as any blade. Your plans unraveled because they were built on lies and murder. I stand before you, restored Rowan. The curse is broken. Your reign ends this day. Rowan's expression twisted with contempt. My reign, you speak as though you still have claim to a throne you abandoned 20 years past. The pack has prospered under my leadership. They know no other alpha. What makes you think they will accept a king who returns from exile, expecting blind loyalty? Perhaps because that king brings proof of your crimes. Celeste stepped forward, her hands already weaving patterns in the air. Magic coalesced before her, forming a shimmering screen that hung suspended above the clearing. Watch, warriors of the pack. Watch and see the truth your alpha has hidden from you for 2 decades. The magical projection sprang to life, pulling memories from Celeste's mind and rendering them visible to all. The warriors watched transfixed as scenes played out in vivid detail. Rowan pouring liquid silver into Theron's wine during a feast. The poison that would weaken the king and make him vulnerable to what came next. Warriors dragging a struggling Celeste from her cottage, while 2 young witches lay dead in spreading pools of blood, their throats cut as demonstration of Rowan's seriousness. Silas Gray standing over those corpses, his voice cold as winter as he gave Celeste her terrible choice. Curse the Alpha King or watch every member of her coven die in the same brutal fashion, and the council elders standing behind him. 5 wolves whose names Ember recognized from Pinewood territory. Old Garrett, who ran the general store. Thomas, who owned half the timber rights in the region. Margot, the healer, who had refused to teach Ember. They voted. The memory showed it clearly. 5 voices raised in agreement, sanctioned what came next as necessary for the good of the pack. The scene shifted to show the curse itself, Theron collapsing as magic took hold. His body convulsing between forms while Rowan watched with satisfaction, barely concealed behind a mask of feigned sorrow. Finally, the projection showed Rowan addressing the pack, weaving his lies about tyranny and necessary action, painting himself as reluctant savior rather than ambitious traitor. When the projection faded, several of the warriors who had accompanied Rowan stood with expressions of horror and betrayal. One dropped his weapon, the clang of steel on stone unnaturally loud in the shocked silence. Lies! Rowan snarled, though his voice lacked conviction. Magical illusions mean nothing. Any witch could fabricate such scenes. Then explain the mark. Theron pushed aside his shirt to reveal his shoulder fully. There, rendered in lines that seemed to glow with their own inner light, was the royal symbol. A triple moon sigil that only those of the original bloodline could bear. It was not something that could be forged or faked, a birthright granted by the moon goddess herself to those destined to lead. Gasps rose from the assembled warriors. Several fell to their knees immediately, recognizing what they witnessed. Others stepped back from Rowan, their loyalty visibly fracturing as truth crashed through carefully maintained deceptions. "You bear the mark of the royal line," one of the elder warriors said, his voice shaking. "Only Theron Nightfang and his descendants carry that symbol. You are the true Alpha King." Rowan's face had gone pale, but he was not finished. Had ruled for 20 years through manipulation and calculated violence. Would not surrender power without final resistance. He is also the cursed beast who terrorized our borders for 20 years. Rowan's voice rose to a shout. Even now he could transform, lose control, slaughter you all. Is that the king you wish to serve? The curse is broken, Celeste stated with absolute certainty. The mate bond severed what I was forced to create. Theron Nightfang has full control of his transformations, as he did before you poisoned and cursed him. He is no more threat to his people now than he was during his original reign. More warriors abandoned their positions, moving away from Rowan toward Theron. The tide was turning, loyalty shifting as truth became undeniable. But Rowan was not done. He drew his sword, silver blade gleaming in the morning light. "If I cannot rule, then neither shall you," his voice carried across the valley. "I challenge you, Theron Nightfang, combat by ancient law, witnessed by these assembled wolves. The victor claims the throne and the loyalty of all present. The defeated accepts exile or death, a formal challenge following the oldest laws of their kind." Theron could not refuse without appearing weak, without ceding legitimacy to Rowan's continued rule. And Rowan knew it, counted on it, believed that 20 years of soft living as king against 20 years of survival as beast would give him the advantage, despite Theron's restoration. "I accept your challenge." Theron's voice rang clear across the clearing. "Under witness of the moon goddess and these assembled wolves, we will settle this as our ancestors did. By strength, by skill, by right of the strongest." The warriors formed a circle, creating an arena in the clearing. Coven members supplied weapons, swords for both combatants, balanced and deadly. No armor would be worn. This would be decided through pure combat, the most ancient way of determining rightful leadership. Before the fight could begin, Ember stepped forward, her voice carrying across the assembled wolves with unexpected authority. "I was Omega, lowest rank, my life deemed worthless enough to throw away. But I found the truth your leaders buried." She gestured to the space where Celeste's projection had hung. "I saved your king's life with knowledge they said was useless. I broke a curse they said was unbreakable. I stand here as Luna, not because I was born to it, but because I earned it." She paused, making sure every warrior heard her next words. "When Theron wins, and he will win, we are not restoring the old kingdom. We are building something better, where rank is earned, where Omegas have rights, where justice matters more than bloodline, where truth matters more than comfortable lies." A cheer rose from the assembled wolves, not just for Theron, but for Ember herself. She had earned their respect through demonstrated merit, through courage and intelligence, and compassion, through everything the old hierarchy claimed Omegas could never possess. Theron met her eyes across the circle, pride and love and gratitude all tangled in his expression. Then he turned to face Rowan. The duel was brutal and swift. Rowan fought with the rage of a man watching his world crumble, his strikes powerful but increasingly wild as Theron's defense remained impenetrable. 20 years of ruling from the safety of a throne had made Rowan soft where it mattered most. He had forgotten what it meant to fight for survival, to face death with every sunrise. Theron had not forgotten, could never forget. After 2 decades as hunted prey, combat was breathing. The dance lasted 5 terrible minutes. Rowan landed a glancing blow across Theron's ribs. Blood welled but didn't slow him. The link between Ember and Theron vibrated with recognition. She felt strength flow through their connection, felt the power of their completed bond surge like a tide. And Theron rallied. His counterstrike sent Rowan's sword flying. Before the usurper could recover, Theron's blade was at his throat, pressed against the pulse that hammered frantically beneath skin. "Yield!" The command carried absolute authority, the voice of a king who had reclaimed his throne through strength and right both. Rowan's face twisted with rage and humiliation. For a heartbeat, he seemed ready to refuse, to force Theron to execute him right there. But survival instinct won over pride. "I yield." The words came out bitter, poisonous, but they came. Theron lowered his blade but did not step away. "By the ancient laws witnessed here, the throne returns to its rightful holder. Do any challenge this claim?" Silence answered him. The warriors who had accompanied Rowan now knelt in submission, recognizing their true Alpha King. Even those who had served Rowan longest could not deny what they had witnessed. "Then hear my judgment," Theron's voice carried to every corner of the valley. "Rowan Blackthorn, you who poisoned your king, who threatened innocence to force a curse, who built your reign on lies and murder, I grant you exile. You will leave these territories before the next moonrise and never return. Should you set foot on Pack lands again, the sentence will be death." Gasps rose from the assembled wolves. Exile was considered worse than execution for most shifters, condemned the exiled to life without Pack, without the connections that defined their existence. But it was also mercy, a demonstration that Theron would not rule through vengeance even when vengeance was justified. You let me live. Rowan's confusion was genuine. After everything I did, you grant mercy. I grant justice. Death would be too quick, too clean. You will live with what you have done, stripped of power and position, alone in a way you never forced me to be alone. That is sufficient punishment. Theron turned to address the 5 council elders who stood among Rowan's warriors. The ones Celeste's memory projection had shown voting for treason 20 years ago. You 5 voted for my removal. You maintained lies for 2 decades. You sent an innocent girl to die last week to protect those lies. His voice held steel beneath the surface calm. Justice demands your punishment, but mercy demands I give you choice. He paused, making sure they understood the weight of what came next. Confess your crimes publicly. Renounce your council seats. Spend your remaining years serving the Omegas you oppressed, or accept exile with Rowan. 4 of the 5 had chose confession immediately, falling to their knees and speaking their guilt for all to hear. Only old Thomas chose exile, his pride too great to bend even in the face of certain isolation. 2 warriors came forward to escort Rowan and Thomas from the valley, ensuring they would not linger to cause further trouble. As they led the fallen Alpha away, Rowan looked back one final time, his expression unreadable. Then he was gone, disappearing into the forest that had been Theron's prison for so long. The moment Rowan passed beyond sight, the assembled pack erupted in celebration. Warriors who had served Theron decades ago shouted his name with tears streaming down weathered faces. Coven members embraced one another, relief and joy mingling with grief for the 20 years lost. Even those who had never known Theron's original reign seemed caught up in the moment, recognizing they had witnessed something momentous. The end of 2 decades of lies, the restoration of their true king. Celeste approached, her expression satisfied despite the exhaustion that marked her features. Magic like what she had wielded today took a toll. You have reclaimed your throne, my king. Now comes the harder work. Rebuilding what was broken, healing what was damaged. Theron reached for Ember, drew her against his side. I will not do it alone. I have my mate, my Luna. Together we will forge something better than what existed before. The formal coronation came 3 days later, time enough to travel back to Pinewood territory, to gather the entire pack in the central square where Ember had once been offered as sacrifice. Hundreds filled the space now, their expressions ranging from hope to skepticism to outright disbelief. Many of the younger wolves had never known another alpha, had grown up believing Rowan's lies were truth. Theron stood before them in armor that had been his father's, polished until it gleamed despite its age. Beside him, Ember wore a simple dress of deep green, the mate mark visible on her neck for all to see. Celeste stood witness, prepared to show her magical projection again if any doubted the truth. I am Theron Nightfang, he began, his voice carrying across the square without need for amplification. 20 years ago, I was your Alpha King. My beta poisoned me, forced a witch to curse me, spread lies about my reign to justify his coup. He paused, letting the words settle. For 20 years, I lived as the beast you feared, trapped in wolf form, losing more of my humanity with each passing season. I do not blame those who believed Rowan's lies. He was convincing, had evidence he carefully fabricated. None of you had reason to question a beta you trusted. But the truth stands revealed now. The witch who was forced to curse me lives to testify. The mate who broke that curse stands at my side, and I bear the royal mark that cannot be forged or falsified. He pushed aside his armor to reveal the triple moon sigil glowing faintly on his shoulder. Even from a distance, its authenticity was undeniable. An elderly wolf pushed through the crowd, moving slowly with the aid of a carved walking stick. One of the ancients, wolves who had lived through multiple alpha reigns and carried the pack's history in their memories. I remember you. Her voice creaked with age but carried clearly. I remember a young king who brought justice to territories plagued by tyrants, who settled disputes fairly, who protected the weak, who asked for counsel rather than demanding blind obedience. Tears tracked down her weathered face. Welcome home, my king. We have missed you. Others echoed her sentiment, voices rising in a chorus of welcome. Not all joined in. Some remained silent, reserving judgment or still loyal to Rowan's memory. But the majority responded with clear acceptance, sufficient foundation to rebuild upon. The formal ceremonies took hours. Theron was anointed with sacred oils by the pack's spiritual leaders, swore oaths to uphold justice and protect his people, accepted pledges of loyalty from warriors and civilians alike. When finally Ember was called forward to be proclaimed Luna Queen, her hands trembled only slightly as the crown was placed upon her head. Equal ceremony, equal crown, equal authority. Her coronation included specific vows that no Luna had ever been required to speak before. To elevate those the old system crushed, to judge by merit, not birth. To remember I was Omega and never forget what that meant. Former Omegas served as her honor guard, a symbolic revolution that made several of the older wolves shift uncomfortably. But no one protested. Not when their king stood beside his Luna with absolute certainty written across his face. The months that followed brought change that rippled through the pack like stones thrown into still water. Theron moved quickly to establish his authority while demonstrating the fairness his reign would embody. Warriors who had served Rowan but committed no crimes were offered positions based on merit. Those who had participated in the original coup faced judgment proportional to their involvement. The pack's resources, which Rowan had controlled tightly, were redistributed to ensure even the lowest-ranking wolves had access to necessities. Silas Gray Rowan's former beta was stripped of his title and assigned to the lowest ranks. His survival, a deliberate reminder of what blind obedience to a corrupted alpha could cost. Celeste's coven was granted lands and protection. Their sanctuary expanded to welcome other magical practitioners who had fled during Rowan's reign. The ancient bond between rulers and witches was restored, ensuring that magic would serve justice rather than be perverted to serve ambition. But it was the reforms Ember personally championed that truly transformed the kingdom. The Omega Rights Act passed 6 weeks after the coronation. Omegas could now own property, choose their own mates, refuse assignments deemed too dangerous, hold council positions if they proved their competence. Ember personally taught Omega children to read and write, skills that had been forbidden before. She established the Healers Guild, teaching medical knowledge to wolves of all ranks. Her grandmother's journals became textbooks. The wisdom Eleanor had preserved, now spreading to benefit everyone. The merit-based hierarchy replaced hereditary privilege. Warrior ranks were earned through trials open to all. Council seats were selected by vote rather than bloodline. Anyone could petition for rank increase by proving their competence through demonstrated skill. The justice system was overhauled completely. Public trials became mandatory. No more secret executions or disappearances. A council of mixed ranks judged cases, ensuring that the powerful could not simply dispose of those who inconvenienced them. Ember instituted Luna's Court, a place where Omegas and other vulnerable wolves could bring grievances, knowing they would receive fair hearing. She personally heard many of the cases, her judgments becoming known for their wisdom and compassion, both. Resource redistribution followed. The old family's hoarded wealth was taxed. The funds used to build schools and healing centers. Food stores were shared equally during hard seasons. No wolf would starve while others feasted. One afternoon, 3 months after the coronation, Ember summoned her father Owen and stepmother Vivian to the castle. Her half-sister Wren came with them, looking nervous but hopeful. They stood in the throne room's antechamber. Owen with shoulders hunched, unable to meet his daughter's eyes. Vivian wearing an expression that suggested attendance was compulsory rather than voluntary. "You summoned us, Luna Queen." Owen's voice barely rose above a whisper. "I did." Ember studied them. These people who had once been her family, who had stood silent while she was offered as sacrifice. "You have petitioned for return to the main territory, for homes closer to the castle. I am here to grant that request, but with conditions." Vivian's expression soured. "What conditions?" "Owen, you will work in the stables under the head groom's supervision. Your wages will be fair, but nothing more. You abandoned your daughter when she needed protection. Earn your place through honest labor or leave." She turned to her stepmother. "Vivian, you will have no position or special consideration. Your cruelty to me as a child is not forgotten. You may live in pack territory, but you will find no favoritism here." Both father and stepmother looked as though they wished to protest but lacked the courage. Finally, they nodded acceptance and withdrew, leaving only Wren. "And me?" the girl asked, her voice small. "What is my punishment?" "You have no punishment." Ember moved closer, seeing the child her sister had been, the young woman she was becoming. "You cried when I was taken. You showed compassion when none other did. If you wish it, I offer you a place in my household, an apprenticeship learning statecraft and governance. You are blood Wren. That still matters to me." Wren's face crumpled. She threw herself into Ember's arms, sobbing with relief and gratitude. Ember held her sister close. This one piece of her past worth salvaging and nurturing. That evening, Ember found Theron on the castle's highest balcony, staring out at the territories he now ruled. She moved to stand beside him. Heat bloomed where the bond flared between them. "Celeste confirmed it today," she said quietly. "I am pregnant. We will have a child by spring." Theron turned to her, wonder and joy transforming his features. He pulled her close, one hand moving to rest gently against her still flat stomach. "An heir, a future that continues what we are building here." "Are you happy?" Ember asked. "With how everything has unfolded. I spent 20 years as a beast, believing I would die trapped and alone. You gave me back not just my throne, but my humanity, my hope, my future. Yes, Ember, I am happy beyond any words to express it." They stood together as the sun set over their kingdom. Behind them lay betrayal and suffering. Years stolen and lives damaged, but ahead stretched possibility, a chance to build something better than what had existed before. The pack that had cast Ember out now celebrated her as their Luna. The king who had been cursed now ruled with wisdom, earned through suffering. And in the growing life, Ember carried hope, took root for a generation that would never know the darkness their parents had overcome. Far below the kingdom thrived. Omegas walked freely through streets where they had once cowered. Children of all ranks played together without thought to hierarchy. In the communal square, a memorial stone had been erected. To those who suffered under unjust hierarchy. Never forgotten. Never again. The 4 council elders who had chosen confession over exile worked in the communal kitchens, serving meals to the very Omegas they had once oppressed, living their penance with dignity regained through honest labor. Celeste's coven had integrated fully into pack life. Witches teaching alongside warriors. Magic and strength working in harmony as they had in the old days before Rowan's corruption. Ren studied scrolls in the Luna's court, learning from her sister how power should be wielded, how justice should be served, how the next generation could build on the foundation Ember and Theron had laid. If the child is a girl, Ember said softly, we name her Sarah, after my mother. And if it a boy to help them, we choose together as equals as we do all things. Theron smiled. Sarah Nightfang, the first princess born to a restored kingdom. She will grow up in a world where sacrifice is not demanded of the vulnerable, where justice matters more than rank, where earned respect trumps inherited privilege. That is the legacy we are building, Ember agreed, not just for our child, but for every child born into this pack, for every Omega who deserves better than being thrown away, for every wolf who was told their worth was determined at birth rather than through their own actions. The mate mark on her neck glowed softly in the twilight, answering the mark on Theron's shoulder, pulsing in rhythm with their shared heartbeat, two halves of one whole, bound beyond breaking, from sacrifice to sovereignty, from victim to victor, from Omega to everything. They had walked through fire and emerged transformed, had broken curses and toppled tyrants, had built a kingdom on foundations of justice rather than lies, and they had only just begun. The story of Ember Ashwood and Theron Nightfang would be told for generations. The Omega who was offered a sacrifice and became a queen. The cursed king who reclaimed his throne through love freely given. The mate bond that shattered 20 years of imprisonment and reshaped the world. But the story was not about them. Not really. It was about the truth that power earned through merit lasts longer than power taken through force. That compassion builds stronger foundations than cruelty. That those the world dismisses as worthless often possess the greatest strength of all. It was about the simple revolutionary idea that everyone deserves a chance to prove their worth, to choose their own path, to rise as high as their courage and intelligence and dedication can take them. And it was about the enduring truth that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is see someone for who they truly are. Not their rank or their circumstances. Not what others have decided about them, but the soul beneath. The potential waiting to be recognized. Theron had seen Ember when she was meant to die forgotten, had recognized her worth when the world called her worthless, had given her a choice when choices had always been made for her. And Ember had seen Theron when he was trapped as a beast, had recognized the king beneath the curse, had chosen him when wisdom suggested fleeing. Together they had proven that the mate bond was not fate forcing two souls together, but two souls choosing each other freely, again and again, through every trial, every hardship, every moment when walking away would have been easier. The moon rose full over their kingdom, casting silver light across lands that were finally truly at peace. And in the castle in their chambers, the Alpha King and his Luna Queen held each other close. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles to fight, new reforms to implement, new wolves who needed convincing that the old ways were truly dead. But tonight they had this, each other, the bond humming between them, the child growing safe in love, the kingdom they had fought so hard to reclaim. It was enough. It was everything. And it was only the beginning.